Well, hello, Sarah. I'm very much looking forward to this chat because I think that you have one of the most unique and extraordinary tales about life and just navigating all our different twists and turns and surprises. And I'm really excited to share your wisdom and what you've learned through that with everyone. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
The first thing I want to ask you is, and this is what I ask everyone, is just a straight out, open answered, open question of what do you wish that more women knew?
Um, I have a strange answer to this one. My partner and I share a psychic who, and she's amazing. And she told her the last session that she had that remember that the extraordinary can happen to anybody.
Mm,
And I've never forgotten it because it's so true. I think we all feel like we all see the edges of our world, I guess. Like, this is my home, this is my work, this is my family, and, this is what I can achieve within that space. But really, everybody is so limitless in what they can have and achieve and experience in life.
I love
Um,
that so much.
and yeah, extraordinary things can happen to very ordinary people like me and all the people that I teach and know. And it's just amazing to know that.
And to keep in that hope, I mean, this is one of the big things with anxiety is that we get into this very limited box of thinking where we just feel like we're surrounded by these four walls and that's it. And then you go into that more expansive place, and at the same time as expanding past the limits, you're also opening your mind and calming that anxiety because you start to feel, oh, okay, there's more. This
Yeah.
isn't it. So I want to hear a little more about your experience of discovering that. But before we do, can you take us back to the beginning of your story? I know you grew up in WA, sort of almost in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, Gelting, WA. It's sort of like a bigger town now, but when I grew up, it was, a couple of thousand people, really like long, deserted, sandy beaches, one high school, one main road, sort of in the center of town. And it was a really beautiful childhood. Like I had horses, I rode around. I remember, one weekend, me and my friend decided to ride to Red Rooster. I don't think you have that in every part of Australia, but it's like a chicken and chip shop. So we spent the whole day riding our horses to the town. We went through the drive-through on our horses and ordered chicken and chips. And yeah, that's the sort of things we do for fun as teenagers, like build cubbies and swim in our horses and pick a mountain or pick something we could see in the distance and see if we could ride to it. So a very sheltered upbringing, it was just kind of adventures and books. And um, my parents never let us have a TV. So I was always really jealous when we go to school and other girls would be talking about what happened on 90210 and I had no idea. Um, Very sheltered.
Amazing. Okay. And so coming from this sort of sheltered upbringing, what happened when you sort of, or what was it that led you to sort of explore the big wide world?
I was a really big reader as a kid. I still am. I love books. And I think as entertainment, I just used to read. I used to go to the library after school every weekend and just read and read and read. And I had this image of what the world outside of my world could be like. I read books about, adventurers like Robinson Crusoe and Christopher Columbus. Like I loved adventure stories and all the beautiful old Enid Blyton books, like The Magic Faraway Tree and The Famous Five. And I kind of thought like that was what the world would be like outside of mine. Um, but then when I got out there, it was so glitzy and shiny and superficial and suburbs and people just going to work every day, which was awful for me because I had these plans for my life where I would just, go and explore the world and there'd be islands and jungles and all of these amazing things to find. But it was just sort of suburbs and 9 to 5 jobs, which was really depressing for a young woman.
Do you think when you were at that time of your life, like just sort of seeing this, like, oh, this almost deflated, like, oh, it's not what I thought it was going to be, that you ever would have imagined the adventures you've had in your life?
No, I remember I went to university in Perth at Curtin University, and I lived in student housing because I was from the country. I remember just sitting in the common room and thinking, God, is this it? Like, this is what life is going to be like? Like, I'm going to school, it's pretty boring. People are pretty boring. And after this, I'm going to get a job. And it was awful. I couldn't see that anything extraordinary could happen from that point.
Do you think you felt some sort of anxiety or felt kind of flat with that realization? Because I'm asking because from my experience, what you're describing is something similar to what I also experienced, and I felt really anxious about that. Like I was like, oh, like I'm not going to feel that. This is like it's just bleakness. It's just like blah, human
Yeah,
life, adult life. Ugh.
yeah. I think it's a unique combo of depression and anxiety. I
Yeah.
think, I was an anxious kid. I'm shy and introverted, and being around a lot of like very extroverted blonde, girls who surfed and were popular with the boys. Yeah, definitely very depressed, very anxious, which I think closes your vision off even more. It like sort of shuts you down into like a smaller and smaller world. Um, and just didn't realize what the problem was. And I think I couldn't see a way out of it for myself.
So, okay, you're in your stuckness. What were the next steps there? Was it just, well, got to make some adult decisions and just try to make it all work?
Yeah, so I finished university and I ended up moving to London, working for this really big consultancy. We were working on the Olympic Games and I had a very high profile job. So I was, I guess, achieving everything at the best of what was told to me that life should be like. And I just got to a place where I was so anxious and um, almost unstable that I sort of had to take extended leave from work. And I guess it was like, looking back now, I can realize it was definitely a rock bottom. So I kept trying and trying and trying to make it through every day and control my anxiety and find happiness and, going out with my friends and drinking and partying. But I got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I remember one day I just couldn't walk into work. Like I stood outside the building and I went home and I rang them. I was like, I can't come to work today. And I just did, I think I had 6 weeks off and
Hmm.
resigned.
Do you
And
remember that day what you were kind of thinking, like about like why you couldn't go in? Was it just like, oh, the whole thought of it just makes me feel sick?
I thought there was a problem with me. So I thought that
Yeah.
maybe I was, you know, I guess unstable, like not able to handle real life, or I guess I felt like I had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just felt like I had a problem and I didn't know how to fix it.
Can I just thank you for saying that? Because the amount of beautiful, intelligent, like capable women that come to me and say like I'm not sure I'm like cut out for normal adult life is like everyone, we all think this and no one talks about it, and we all walk around looking like we got our shit together and kind of on the outside like making it work, and probably other people in your life would have seen you at that time and gone like, she's all good, look at her with her amazing job and living in London.
Yeah. I don't know if normal adult life is that normal.
No, it's not. Spoiler alert, we're all messy.
um, yeah, it's not that normal, I don't think. I don't think we're designed to live like that. But I all the information I had around me at the time was telling me that is what everybody does with their life, and
Yeah.
I should be able to handle it and be appreciative of it.
Yeah. And on some level, you were not feeling like that was right for you.
Yeah, I wanted it to be, but I just couldn't. I just got to the point where I just couldn't.
Yeah. And so you made that conclusion instead of it being like the world around you or the way your life was constructed might be the problem. It was like, no, you must be the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so what happened next?
So I had a little property in Darwin. I briefly worked up there and bought a unit, and it was right before the property boom. So things went crazy, and I decided to sell this little house that I had. And so I had some money. And I just thought, like, I'll just travel, because of my happiest times at up to that point had been traveling. I traveled through Southeast Asia before I got to London, and had been doing some adventures around Europe. And I thought, I know that that will bring me some calm, but also I might find what I'm here to do on the way. Like, I'll work and meet people, and I suppose I felt like on this adventure I would figure out what I'm supposed to be doing, or I'd find a job I liked, or a place I'd make me feel comfortable to live in. That suits.
Yeah.
And
So
I,
a bit of a quest for purpose.
yeah,
Is that what you hadn't felt you'd found yet?
yeah, I felt so disconnected. I remember talking to a therapist at the time, and I'm like, I just feel like a spaceman that's like been untethered from his ship, and I'm just floating through space, and there is no, I'm just waiting to die, basically. And so
Mm.
it was a really scary feeling. And I felt like on this trip that maybe I would find like my person that would make me feel better, or a place to live that I felt comfortable in, or a job, something that would make me feel better.
Yeah.
I had a great time. I had a lot of really crazy experiences, but I remember after about a couple of years of traveling, I was sitting in San Francisco just looking out at the water, and I still felt as anxious, and as I hadn't found what it was. I think I'd managed to distract myself for a few years, but I hadn't found it. And I just asked myself the question, like, what is it that you really want? Like, what would make you happy, Sarah? And my answer to myself was like, I just want to be around nobody, where no one can find me, where I can just be. And I was sort of thinking, like, well, what is that? Is like a cabin somewhere, or, a bushwalk, but then a boat sailed past. And I was like, I've got to go sailing. And I just knew that that's what I was supposed to do, is live on a boat and start just sailing. 'Cause I love to travel. I loved adventure, and I just wanted to be on my own and have those experiences.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, fully launched into a project of, I've never sailed before. And yeah, found a guy, like a captain, who was happy to take me under his wing and train me, bought a boat, and spent about a year learning to sail, learning how to fix engines and sails and navigate and do everything I needed to do on my own to accomplish this adventure.
That must have been, on one hand, very brave to sort of do this totally different thing that you hadn't been a sailor before, and there was all this stuff to learn. And you spent a whole year doing that. Were you based out of San Francisco when you did that?
South of LA, when I was doing that, I think looking back, people were saying I was brave, but I think I was just really desperate to find some peace.
Yeah.
I was so anxious and so depressed that I was willing to try anything to not feel that way, because it was felt so awful to have those feelings.
Yeah. So on one hand, it looked brave, but inside you're just like, this isn't brave. This is just me trying to grab the next thing that might light me up.
Yeah, it was sort
Yeah.
of felt like survival. I was
Yeah.
at that point, I was about 25, and everyone around me was like falling in love and having babies and, buying houses. Like, they felt like they all had their purpose, but I just didn't feel like I even knew who I was. Like, I just was so lost.
Yeah.
So it was more of a running, I think, than a bravery.
Do you think, Sarah, like obviously that's how you felt at that time? Do you think that looking back on it now, these people that, are in love and have their life kind of sorted and they're buying their house and all of that are necessarily more found than the lostness you felt? Like, do you think on some level we are all in this messy navigation of just like, what's the next thing that sort of makes some kind of sense?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm a lot older now, and I teach women my age, younger and older. And so I get the unique opportunity to kind of see into everybody else's lives as well as my own. And I think what I've learned is that perhaps maybe a lot of people I thought had it together back then were just more comfortable following the mold than I was.
Mm,
Um, More okay, maybe pushing uncomfortable feelings down.
yes. I think that's spot on. I
Yeah.
really like how you describe that because on some level, I think we all have this like yearning for adventure and something calling us. But
Yeah.
it's whether, I suppose, you're pushed into a corner enough, which is what I think is the, and I don't want to go into like there's gifts in anxiety and depression in that sense of like, trivializing anyone's experience. But sometimes if we're not pushed into that corner, like we are comfortable enough to just kind of plod through. And that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to my sister the other day and she's like, what do you think the number one thing is that you've done that's led you to this point in life? And I just said to her, honestly, like the hard times that I went through, like if I
Yeah.
didn't have those hard times, I wouldn't have the happiness I have now. Like they really were my biggest teacher. And
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for them, even though it was excruciating at the time. But
Yeah. But it forces us to ask big questions of ourselves and of life. And like, is there something possibly extraordinary that could happen to me?
yeah,
And going and kind of like, yeah, going out there and trying anyway, you
yeah,
know? Okay, so let's go back to your story. So you're learning to sail, you learned to sail for a year
yeah.
and just doing this as this thing kind of by yourself, but you got this guy teaching you.
Yeah. So I was having a great time and started sailing off on my own. So started sailing up and down the coast of America and then up and down the coast of Mexico. And everything was going really well. I spent about a year just living and sailing on my boat, like anchored in, lonely sandy beaches and little Mexican towns. And
Wow.
I had the best time. Like I made a lot of boaty friends and I sort of felt for the first time more connected than I ever have. I've met people who are like me, having similar experiences, even though they're much older, they're all in their 50s and 60s. And for the first time, I wasn't depressed, I wasn't anxious. I felt like I'd met myself. Sailing is really beautiful, but sometimes it's really hard. And I was able to do it, like all on my own. Most people sailing a boat of my size need two or three people on the boat to sail, but I was doing everything on my own and taking these big trips through the night. And I felt at peace. I really felt like the expectations of society had fallen off me and I could finally just be myself. And yeah, I had this beautiful life where I would, catch fish and swim and sunbake and read and draw and paint and take photos and walk and, incredible experiences.
Sounds so amazing. Were there ever like times where you were like, oh, I should be happy, but I'm like, there would be, you'd feel a bit anxious about like just floating around in the sea? Or did you still
Yeah.
feel that sense of purposeness in there?
I had anxiety about money. I
Mm.
didn't have a job and I only had a fixed amount and it was running it was running out. So my anxiety was more about I'm so happy and I don't want to lose this happiness. And I know I will if I run out of money. Like, what am I going to do to fund this trip? I just want to stay in this happy bubble forever. Like, I finally found happiness and I don't want to lose it. So I'd get anxiety about the future, like constantly trying to figure out what was next. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to change, but I knew that they would.
Okay. And so you're living this dream life most of the time anyway, and feeling like it sounds like you really felt a capability within yourself. Like that's what I'm sort of imagining, like the challenge you set for yourself. Like, I'm just going to go sail all by myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt strong and wise and peaceful. And everyone around me was just like, this is just amazing what you're doing. Like, I'd meet people and I'd come into like a little bit beach or something and meet other people on their boats there, and they just couldn't believe what I was doing. And I was like, wow, I had no idea this is such a big deal. People told me it was. I didn't think that it was such a big deal, actually, until I realized that I was probably the only person out there doing that kind of thing in the world at that time. It wasn't something people did,
Mm,
15, 20 years ago.
yeah, I suppose in this era now with Instagram and things like that, we've got more of that. Like, you can somehow potentially live like that and monetize it, or like, get,
Yeah.
if you have a following or whatever you do. That's, so it's more of a like, okay, the digital nomad idea. But yeah, interesting. Okay. And so then,
Yeah. So then, I was sailing one night to get to the next place I was wanting to go. I just had some horrible weather, like the worst weather I've ever been in. Everything started to go wrong. And I ended up hitting something at sea, and I don't know what it was, but it was like nothing on the map. Sometimes there's uncharted things on maps, especially in areas like Mexico at sea, or there's like shipping containers or sleeping whales on that coast all the time. So I hit something that it did enough damage to my boat.
sleeping whales, did you just say?
Yeah. So it's like it's a route for whales, like where I was sailing, and it happens a lot. So the next year after I hit whatever I hit, another boat in the same spot hit something as well at the same time of the year, and it was a sleeping whale because someone saw it, and two people on that boat died and only one survived. So I was very lucky to survive what I'd survived. But whales are very, you know, regular. Like they always sleep in the same spots at the same time of year. Like they travel the same route. So it probably was a whale or a shipping container or something like that. But I, yeah, it was the middle of the night, horrible weather, and my boat was sinking, and I had to figure out what I was going to do to save myself. And um, I was well trained enough to have a plan, and I had emergency positioning beacons and things like that, and which I set off because I remember my instructor always said, "You only use this if you're pretty sure you're going to die." I'm like, "I'm pretty sure I'm going to die." It's time, just hit the button. Um, but yeah, it's such a remote part of the world that it took about 5 or 6 hours for the Mexican Navy to get to me. And by that point, I was really very hypothermic. My boat was nearly gone. But I got pulled out of the water really, like I probably had about 10 minutes left before I was gone. So just in the nick of time. And then, yeah, I ended up living in, they just didn't know what to do with me. So the guys that rescued me, they had never really had this situation happen before. Like they usually are looking for like Mexican drug runners, and
Mm.
they pulled this Australian girl out of the water on this like very remote part of the world. And I didn't have a passport or any money or any clothes or anything. And I didn't have a visa to be in the country either, or any means to support myself. So they managed to find a little community that kind of adopted me until they could figure out what to do. So this little Mexican village, I became like their village project, and they gave me this little house and a pet cat to keep me company, and tried to include me in things in the community. So I ended up living on this Mexican beach for about 6 months.
So hang on, let's just woe back a little moment. So at what point, I do want to come back to this, but like, you're just on your boat in the middle of the night, rough weather. Did you feel like a bump? Like, did you feel a knock that alerted you to?
Oh yeah, yeah, it was a huge impact.
Okay.
Yeah, huge impact.
And
And
did that wake you up in your sleep?
no, I was awake sailing at the time. I could in the it was the middle of the night, so everything was black. Like it was a new moon, so there was no moonlight. Um, and yeah, like everything slowed down. It was a huge impact.
Did
And
you know pretty soon after the impact that that was probably going to sink your boat?
um, I thought I was okay. So it's like, all right, I think I'm okay after impact. Like my whole boat nearly lifted out of the water, this giant, huge boat. And
Wow.
I went downstairs, and like I was just listening for like sounds and things just to try and make sure everything's okay. And yeah, the whole side of my boat had cracked open and water was just pouring in, and it was just not a good situation.
Wow. And so then everything goes under, you lose all your possessions.
Yeah.
And, were you just like, I mean, in my mind, I'm like, the first thing I think of is like my phone, my wallet. Like, did you kind of my passport maybe? Did you worry about those things?
No, no, not at all. I think I knew I was in so much trouble that I was sort of readying myself for, like, this is it. This is
Yeah.
how I go out. And I was so certain I was going to die that I was making peace with things. And I think my one thought was like, oh, my parents are going to be so angry with me. Like, are they going to be so angry with me? But yeah, I think I felt a sense of happiness that I'd finally felt peaceful in life,
Mm.
and I felt really bad for my mum and dad. But yeah, it was those type of, I wasn't worried about anything on my boat at all. It wasn't not anything I was thinking about. I was more thinking about, yeah, like reflections on my life, basically.
Wow. Okay. And then you're discovered and you're living in this village. Did you have any contact? Like, could you phone home or like let them know what had happened?
Yeah, there was like this little police station. It wasn't a police station. It was like a shed that was like a multi-government use shed. And I think one policeman would come like every 2 weeks for half a day. And when he was there, I could go, and there was like a computer with emails. So I could send emails, to try and talk to my parents. I think once the Mexican Navy, I think they had a phone to my parents. So when I got off the boat, a couple of hours after that, I could talk to my parents, but I was in shock. I don't really remember what I said. So there was sporadic communication that I could access every now and then. But I just didn't really want to talk to anyone. Like, I wanted everyone to know I was okay, but I'd been through a big experience and I just didn't really know how to process that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that stayed with you for a long time after, like just going over the fact that you'd basically, it sounds from what you said, like you'd reconciled, like this is it. This is the end of my life.
Yeah. I mean, I've only just been able to start talking about it in the last few years. I
Mm.
remember I was in a health food store, I don't know, 8 years ago or something, and it was world news at the time, and the woman in there recognized me because she was a sailor, and she wanted to talk to me about it. And I just freaked out. Like, I just freaked out. I think I was like, you can't ask people things like that. I was quite rude to her, but it's only really been the past couple of years I can actually talk about it, because it was a really full on scary, traumatic experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can only try to imagine. I don't think you can unless you've actually been in that kind of situation. But I'm so, so thankful to hear the story, Sarah, because it's not something that we go through every day.
No, it's it's not. Yeah, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah. Okay. And so then there was this time in Mexico. At what point did you, I mean, do you ever feel like you sort of re-entered society after your journey on the sea?
Yeah, so I was living in this little tin shed, and yeah, I didn't have anything. So I, would forage the ocean for food, and neighbors would sometimes drop some things off or invite me for dinner. Um, and I kind of felt like about that yeah, at some point I'm going to have to re-enter society. And so I managed to make my way home to Australia and ended up in Melbourne going back to study design. I'd always been so interested in design, but as a young person, you're sort of told not to pick an arts because you won't make any money or get a job. But I just kind of felt like at that point, well, if I'm going to have to be in society, I may as well be working in something that might bring me some happiness.
And fine arts and design, that was something you'd been interested in much earlier, right?
Yeah, I it was what I first wanted to study at
Yeah.
school, but my parents sort of like, no, you need to pick a science or an engineering, because if you're working, you may as well be making as much as possible and have job certainty basically at the end of school. Um, so I just sort of felt like, well, if I have to earn a living and I have to live in society, then I'm going to do this, even if I'm not paid very well. I will probably be happy,
Because
maybe.
you'd already turned over that stone of what happens when I follow the career that's sort of, more for the security and the financial side than the passion.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't stomach the thought of having to go back to that.
Yeah. Okay. So you're like, your whole body was just like, we're not doing that
Yeah,
anymore.
no way. Yeah.
I can relate to you, Sarah, in a sense, because, I've always felt that about the sort of, the 9 to 5 job, the Monday to Friday working days. A life of flexibility has always called to me, which is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I love meeting a like-minded soul because I so get that almost sickening, like there's something in you that's just like, I can't stomach that.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't help but follow that true passion that had been there, all the
Yeah.
little lights of like curiosity about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I remember someone telling me you should always do for a living what you do in your spare time. Like, and in my spare time, I was already designing, I'd help friends with designs for things. I was always so interested in spaces. My boat was so beautiful, it was people would come onto my boat and they'd be like, wow, this is incredible. I had like paintings and plants and velvet, and
Oh,
it was just otherworldly. And I'd always had a passion for creating beautiful spaces around me. I think because I've always been a bit of an anxious person, that was always something that made me feel safe, was creating cocoons around me that I felt comfortable in, was something I'd done since I was a kid. I remember when I was sort of 5 or 6, I even moved out into the original house on the property where my parents live and still live, and redesigned the whole thing and just lived out there on my own. And I was only 5 or 6. Like
wow.
I was always doing that. But I think it came from a place of security, like wanting my own private worlds around me.
It always fascinates me when it comes to this idea of like, and this, we've sort of been talking a little bit about purpose and finding that purpose, how it comes back to stuff you did as a kid. And so often we'll go, well, I can't, be making mud pies as an adult. But then it's the ways that it often translates. Like maybe you end up cooking, or maybe you end up, molding clay with your hands. And I love how literal yours is.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always just felt, I guess as an adult, I've realized I'm probably a sensitive person. I didn't really realize this as a kid. But for me, my sensitivity is visual sensitivity.
Mm.
Some people I know, they're like audio sensitive, so they can't handle certain noises. But for me, it's visual. So I've been that way since I was a kid. So I've always wanted to create spaces around me that made me feel calm, and safe. So yeah, I was doing that all the way back then.
And then at what point did the whole journey of Captain's Rest start to emerge?
So I was, I went to school, I started my own business, I met someone, I got married, and I was living in Alice Springs and had, the house and dogs and cars and business. And
What brought you to Alice Springs, another place in the middle of nowhere?
so my partner at the time ended up being offered like a job there that
Okay.
was too good to be true, like a really good advancement, I guess, in her work. And I decided, like, yeah, sure, let's try it. Like, there's no reason why not. And yeah, I was miserable, so miserable. Like, I'd found myself back in the place where I'd worked so hard to escape. I'd worked so hard to like live this life off the way I wanted it to be, on this beautiful boat and sailing around and like meeting all these beautiful people. And then I was just sort of stuck in a suburb, hanging out with the same people, like 9 to 5. Just the stuckness of it was so awful. And I was looking in a magazine and there was an article of the west coast of Tasmania, and it was talking about how like barren and desolate and magnificent it was. And I was like, wow, that place sounds amazing. It felt to me like what I'd come from, which was just nowhere, Mexico. And they had this like little insert picture of the shack that I bought that's now called Captain's Rest. And I just hopped on realestate.com and it was for sale. And I was like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to buy it. Like, I'm going to buy that place and make it into my own, because I was living in this like suburban house in Alice Springs that was given to us through my partner's work. So it was this like horrible tiled brick house that just made me feel sick. You know, it was so ugly. And I just wanted to buy this little shack, turn it into my own beautiful world, and then spend part-time down there. So that was what I had in mind, that I would part-time live there to kind of like rest and restore and get what I needed out of life, and then part-time be with my partner and back in the real world. So
Almost like a boat that's in one place.
yeah,
Yeah. And what did people think of this idea?
everyone thought I was crazy. Everyone's like, Tasmania is an awful place. You know, I think I had planned to maybe like rent it out like when I wasn't there loosely to cover some of the costs, or that's how I sold it to my partner at the time. But you know, no one goes to the West Coast, you'll never be able to rent it. You know, it's just a horrible place to be. And I'm like, I don't care what anyone thinks. Like I personally love this, and I just want that. I knew that I needed that to survive at that point, because I was so unhappy. So yeah, I bought it and got a little small mortgage and traveled down there to start working on it.
And so you got there, and was it everything that you had, like your intuition was kind of calling you towards?
Yeah, I remember I took the ferry over from Melbourne and I drove through, you know, the north of Tasmania, where there's, you know, there's towns and it's beautiful, but then you enter like Cradle Mountain and the West Coast. And as I was driving closer and closer to Strawn, where this cabin is, my heart was just beating. Like it felt so full. I felt so alive and so excited. I just could not believe it, because I'd bought this place without ever having been there, never been to the West Coast. And I just felt like every cell in my body was alive. It's tingling with excitement and adventure. I was lit up for the first time in my life since I'd been on my boat. And yeah, I mean, the place was awful. Like it was, you know, on a slant, and like the toilet didn't work and it was gross and it was awful. It was a really horrible little tin shed, basically, with aluminium frame windows. But I had my swag, and I remember I had a little candle, and I drank a half bottle of port my first night, just looked at the stars out the window, and I was like, yes, this is it. Like, this is it. I just felt so good.
That is so gutsy to buy a place you've never been to. But do you think that, in a sense, that sort of added to the magic of the whole discovery and that adventure that it led you to?
Yeah, I mean, it was cheap. You know, it was $80,000. I
Mm.
put a small deposit down, and, you know, the mortgage was like $200 a month or something. And I just knew I needed it to survive, because I was drowning in unhappiness, and I just needed a rest from the world, a rest from society, and my marriage wasn't going well. It was not a nice place to be in, and Alice Springs is an incredible place, but it can be quite suffocating if you haven't really found your click or your groove there, which I hadn't. I've been volunteering for arts organizations, and I just hadn't found my place. Um, so yeah, it didn't matter to me. I
Mm.
knew I needed this.
And then here you were, and you were like almost like once again, kind of going with what lit you up, following that calling within, not listening despite what other people were saying. You were rewarded for that. You were like, oh, this
Yeah.
is I knew it.
Yeah. The year or two before that moment, I was so unhappy and so miserable. And I just, you know, I just wasn't myself. And I remember working on the cabin. I had, you know, a friend help me, you know, build a friend. I just felt so alive, so happy, so peaceful. Like everything had lifted off. And I finally realized, like, I'm not meant for that. I'm not meant for this is what I'm meant for. This is how I need to be living.
And now let's just for the shock factor, let's fast forward for those who don't know what the Captain's Rest is now and what you transform that shack into.
Yeah. So it was my project to create that perfect world for me. You know, I'd been through this horrible boat accident, you know, stranded on a beach in Mexico, whisked back into society, really quite quickly found myself in a really bad marriage that was really abusive, in Alice Springs where I was drowning, and I needed to create this perfect world. So I completely changed this little tin shed into this gorgeous, gorgeous white cottage with beautiful old windows and velvet seats and bath, and it's everything how I wanted life to be. I wanted to create a perfect world for me because I just needed it so badly. Um, so that was always the intention. That's what it was built for and designed for, was for me. You know, it doesn't have a shower because I prefer baths, and the bed's really high because I'm so tall. I love a high bed, you know, so everything in that little cottage is perfectly designed for my happiness.
Oh my gosh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
And these days, I mean, Captain Rest is incredibly, it's well known.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the most well-known Airbnb in the world. It's it is rented out every night of the year round, except for this month because we've had Sydney, Melbourne, and Queensland go into lockdown. So for the first time in about 5 years, we've had a few empty nights. But yeah, it is booked until, I mean, it's guess it's middle of this year. It's booked until February 2022 at the moment. And yeah, we have wait lists for every month, people wanting to come if there's a cancellation. It's just this magical place that people get arrived there, and like I knew it was going to be good, but it was just so much better than I even, there's a sense of magic there that you can't, doesn't really translate. It's an incredible place.
And do you think that whole experience and the uniqueness of the place and the heart and soul you've poured into it, is that what you put the magic of it down to? Like, is that what you put the way that you've kind of, like, we can use the word success, or the way that it's just resonated with so many people?
Yeah.
How do you rationalize it?
um I think that there's two things there. There's a magic there on the West Coast in that particular spot that, you know, there's shacks around me as well. Like it's a little kind of shack village. And yeah, I've been in all of them because I know all my neighbors. And there's just, the magic doesn't exist in them. You know, there's just something about that place that is completely otherworldly. And I think anyone who's been there will tell you it's true. Like we've had so many people get married there and engaged and, you know, make babies, and there's something really special about that place. And I'll always be grateful. I felt like it was healing for me because, you know, towards the end of my renovation, I got really, really sick. And my marriage fell apart pretty much overnight. So, which was the two greatest things that ever happened to me. And at the time was awful, but um, it gave me the life I have now, which is the life I'm supposed to be living. So there's just something magical about that place. I can't describe it, but because I teach what I do now, people always ask me like, why haven't you got, you know, 10 of these? And I always say, when I find something as special as that place, then I will do another one. But I just have never come across any place on earth that's as special as that place. It's just something about it. You'll have to go and see it.
Oh, I'm definitely going at some point, at, like, you know, I might have to wait a year, but
Yeah,
but
2022.
yeah, exactly. Do you still stay there yourself sometimes?
Yeah, so it's been a year since I've been there because we've been so busy. But with the Sydney cancellations, I went up there last month or this month for 5 days.
Nice.
Um, and I always need about 2 months. Like honestly, you just feel like you're not on this planet anymore. And it was amazing. And I'm heading off overseas next week to Europe. So it might be some time before I get back. So it was nice for me to get to say goodbye and have a bit of a
Yeah.
reset.
Oh my gosh. Tell me about the plans for Europe.
Well, I've got a book coming out in October worldwide. So I've managed to get out on a work pass to promote my book in the other parts of the world. So I'm going to be living in France for a couple of months, and then the UK, and then the US, and basically sorting it out overseas until borders change here in Australia and I can come back in easily. But
Incredible.
I'm pretty excited about the adventure.
Wow. So the extraordinary adventures continue.
Yes,
Oh my
definitely.
gosh. Well, I can't wait to hear how the stories unfold. I'll have to get you back on the show, Sarah, in a year or so and like see where you're at, how it's all gone.
I'll either have had an amazing adventure or there'll be like a GoFundMe page to get me back to Australia because it's awful. Like, I don't know. Could
Do
go
you
either.
ever, I'm curious, like, do you ever just like look at the calendar of Captain's Rest and just like block it out for a month or two for yourself?
I don't, because I'm not one of those people that can be organized more than a month in advance. Like, I know that some people can be like, this is what I'm doing for the next year. And I'm just not like that. I think I get anxiety if I have plans more than a month out. Like, I really need flexibility in my life. And
Yeah.
I need to, if I'm feeling stuck, like I'm at a student's property now, but I live about an hour away, but I often need to just change my space and location to be creative. And I'm someone who needs that. So I sort of have to flow with how I'm feeling a little bit more than structure. So I
Yeah.
don't do that because I don't know if I'll be in the country or not when that comes around.
So I relate to that so much, like flowing with your feelings in the way you live your life. Because I have to do that too. Like it was the inevitable conclusion. Do you think there's space in what you've discovered? Because obviously you teach people now to follow that sort of almost, we could use the word business model, that you discovered in Airbnb and those kind of things. But do you think these kind of opportunities give us more space to have that as a reality, to create this our own extraordinary adventure, to flow with our emotions and feelings while still earning an income and being safe?
I do. I think, fast forward, Captain just became really successful despite everything, despite where it is. The size of it's only tiny, and successful in terms of monetary value. Like, it makes $150,000 a year, which is incredible for 40 square meters.
Talk
And
about return on investment.
yeah, and what it gave me was absolute freedom. I'd really worked out, because I'm a scientist and I'm a designer, and I had to make this space work. I worked out the formula. I really like just dove into the study of it and tried and tested new things, and I came up with this really unique formula which only I had, and everybody kind of took notice. So I started teaching it, because all the people reaching out to me told me their stories too. And they were all beautiful women who were like, they were given their houses by their grandparents and they were going to lose them if they didn't make it work financially. Or, a lady had two autistic children and she wanted to make her business work because she wanted to be at home with them instead of having them in care because they weren't happy. And like all these beautiful stories from beautiful women who wanted me to help them for more than financial reasons. It was personal. And
Mm.
so I started teaching it, and they became also successful. So it was never really the plan to become a teacher. I sort of wanted to help certain people because I thought they deserved the freedom that I had. And now, I've got thousands of students around the world, and most of them are just living life like me on their own terms, able to travel and be at home with their kids and grow their own businesses. Like, I had on our online class, we have like the sign up form, which is, I always ask people to tell me about themselves. And I love reading their bios because they're so beautiful. And they always explain to me why they're here.
Mm.
And the last one I got, I think yesterday, said, I've been a stay at home mum my whole life. My kids have finally left home and I really just want to be successful on my own terms and follow my passions. And I'm like, that's what it's all about. Like, it's amazing. Um, So I feel really proud of that, to be able to give that to other people as well.
That is amazing. And honestly, I find it such an inspiring thought to think, because sometimes I feel almost like almost guilty, like that guilt thought will pop in, like that not more people have this kind of lifestyle, that so many of us do have to get up at the crack of dawn on Monday morning and get that Sunday-itis feeling of like, oh, the weekend's over and now it's like back to the grind. And to know that there are these opportunities for people to create, or to think more expansively, and just ask those bigger questions. What if it is possible that I could have this extraordinary moment or this extraordinary life too? I think is so wonderful when it comes to that anxiety and that feeling of like, well, we're stuck like this, because we're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it came out of, I was really sick. Like I was sick for a couple of years and battling autoimmune issues. So the income it was bringing me, and the like being completely hands off, which is a big part of what I teach, was out of necessity, not out of a want for a flexible life. It was because I was too sick to work.
Mm.
And so over those years, I was doing about, I guess, 3 or 4 months worth of work of maybe 1 or 2 hours a day, and then spending the rest of my time in France, just walking and sleeping and resting to try and get better in the sun. So, you know, I felt really guilty because I felt like people looking from the outside in probably thought that I was really lazy or undeserving of the success. But the reality was, it's because I was so sick I couldn't do it, and I kept that a secret. My family knew and my friends, but the outside world just probably saw that I was living this fabulous like global life and didn't appear to be doing any work. But it was just because I was so sick and I had
Mm.
to live that way.
And how amazing to know that even in a situation like that, which, many people would feel so stuck and limited, there are options, there are possibilities and things we can explore.
Yeah, I was on all of the like Reddit groups and Facebook groups for all the particular things I was suffering with, and just, yeah, seeing how other people were coping with it. Their parents were supporting them, their husbands or wives, or just the difficulty people were going through with these not only illnesses but also financial struggles as well that goes along with it when you can't work and people just don't understand why. And yeah,
Yeah.
really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it definitely is, but so heartening again to see that, yeah, there are ways we can kind of always push those limits and see what else is there. And I
Yeah.
just thank you so much for, offering that perspective. And your life is just your life is essentially an artwork, Sarah, if you don't mind me saying it. It is beautiful. It's got its darknesses and its light, and I think people need to hear that inspiring journey you've been on. And I'm sure you have your days still where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but like, as we all do, but it's really amazing. And I thank you so much for sharing it. My last question for you is, for those who've listened and are like, oh my gosh, where do I find more about this woman? How can we pre-order your book? Would you mind sharing that?
You can find everything through my Instagrams. There's three. There's at Captain's Rest, at sarahandrews.co, and at the Hosting Masterclass. And then there's like all the links in the bio for the pre-ordering the book, studying with me, staying at Captain's Rest. Yeah, or just enjoying the beautiful imagery vicariously while you're in lockdown. That would be lovely too. A bit of escapism.
Amazing. I'll make sure that we link all those Instagram accounts in the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been absolutely amazing chatting to you.
My pleasure.
Yay.
Yeah.